Joining me now, Ambassador Thomas Pickering, chair of the State Department's Accountability Review Board on the Benghazi terror attacks. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a busy week on a topic that you have delved into in some depth. So I want to ask you first about your reaction to the criticism that the Accountability Review Board has had. Chairman Issa said that it was either incomplete or, in fact, just wrong. Can you respond to that first?
Well, I'm waiting to see whether there's any there, Candy. I've looked at it very carefully. I listened to the hearings. A number of the criticisms were not based on the actual happenings. We did, of course, see the Secretary. We saw Secretary Burns. We saw Deputy Secretary Nides. We interviewed Pat Kennedy. So a number of the questions that they raised, were we capable and were we complete? And I believe that we still were. I'm kind of waiting to hear a number of things that Greg Hicks raised. And we interviewed Greg, and I admire Greg. He did a very difficult job under very tough circumstances, were certainly answered by himself. Were the airplanes there? Were they ready? Could they come? Could they be there in time? And he already indicated that the defense attaché told him that was not possible. So I've watched this very carefully. Of course, any report is subject to being reviewed, to being criticized, and all the rest. I welcome that, but I don't yet see it.
And the main question, I want to play something for you, and this was Greg Hicks, who's the former deputy chief of mission in Libya, and he was asked about could help have been sent. He mentioned this group that was in the embassy in Libya that wanted to go to the mission in Benghazi. Here was the question.
How did the personnel react to being told to stand down?
They were furious. I can only say, well, I will quote Lieutenant Colonel Gibson. He said, this is the first time in my career that a diplomat has more than somebody in the military.
So here's the bottom line question. Were there military assets anywhere that could have saved these men? Because the implication here is that there was, that possibly lives did not need to be lost had the military acted more quickly.
That group would have arrived after everybody had left the Benghazi airport, but a few. The airport was secure. There were 80, according to the testimony, Libyan armed vehicles and people there securing the airport, so there was no doubt about that.
You're talking about the airport in Benghazi?
The airport in Benghazi, which was the ostensible reason for their going. They were actually extremely useful in helping treat the wounded when they arrived in Tripoli.
To the main question, were there any assets anywhere that could have gone?
We looked at that very thoroughly. Mike Mullen, who was part of this report and indeed worked very closely with all of us and shared many of the responsibilities directly with me, made it very clear that his view as a former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff that there was nothing within range that could have made a difference.
But of course the military would have been responsible for that. But the military opinion is nobody could have gone in there.
That's correct. And General Dempsey, his successor, repeated that in hearings.
They both did. There was a question about whether they could do a flyover just to scramble
even there,
some of these.
The closest flyover possibility was identified at Aviano in northern Italy, 1,600 miles away. That was given a 2 to 3 hour possibility, but it also would require aircraft tankers to refuel those aircraft, and they were not available.
The other complaint was that this report of yours, Accountability Review Board, only went so far. You did heavily criticize the State Department for not responding to what had been obvious threats and obviously unsettled condition, particularly in Benghazi, but in Libya as a whole. But that you only went so far as the Assistant Secretary, that the buck really stops with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Is that not true? And why didn't you discuss this with her?
The buck stops. She had already made it clear that the buck stopped with her. But we were interested in where the decisions were made, and she did not make the security decisions.
Is that in itself a problem, do you think?
No, not at all. I think that it was behind the legislation. We looked into what the Congress was saying at the time it passed the legislation to set up the ARB process. And they said it is traditional for heads of agencies to take responsibility then nobody goes down and finds where the decisions were made. And that's what we'd like to see, and we'd like to help people held responsible for their performance in those decisions.
And what do you make of the back and forth on the talking points, which we know were scrubbed of any kind of mention of terror, certainly when UN Secretary Rice came on this show and 4 others? It was all about this tape, and that's what they thought at the time. What do you make of that?
Candy, that was not in our mandate. We were looking into security, security warning, security capacity, those kinds of things. And so I have been very clear that since it wasn't our mandate, I didn't do the investigation, and I'm not prepared or able to give you a thought on that.
Did you learn anything new in the hearings this week that you did not know on the Accountability Review Board?
I wish I could say yes, because I'm always interested in seeing what's new. I honestly did not.
So as far as you are concerned, do you think Benghazi has been investigated and that information put out to the public as thoroughly as possible?
No, because the FBI is responsible for the criminal investigation, and that's ongoing. And I think you have to separate the two. Ours was securities, there is criminal. That is yet to be done. We may find out much more. They're obviously interested in who perpetrated this, for what reasons. Were they criminally culpable under U.S. law? Those kinds of things.
Okay.
Yep.
Ambassador Pickering, thank you for coming in this morning. I appreciate it.